So I head up the Food and Mood Centre at Deakin University, and we've really led the field of nutritional psychiatry research from its inception, which I'm very pleased to say has now had a major impact on clinical guidelines around the world, and on the way that the paradigm in psychiatry, I would say. And what nutritional psychiatry is this where nutrition as an industrialized nutrition and our food system as the leading contributor to illness and early death via its impact on chronic disease. And then, of course, mental health, mental disorders, and things that come under that rubric, including things such as dementia and ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, etc., that increasingly contributing such a major burden of disease across the globe as the burden of infectious diseases abates somewhat. How do I advance like this?
No, there we go.
Yeah. So nutritional psychiatry is research that looks at how the food that we eat daily contributes to mental and brain health across the life course. And as I said, we've had a big impact on clinical practice and on, I guess, the public knowledge. Our work is reflected in many, many high-level policy documents around the world, but yet we're not seeing any changes in policy. I think we all know what needs to be done, but it's not yet happening. And where we look...
They will do it.
I'll let them do it? Okay.
Yeah, you'll tell them next.
Okay, so what we have, of course, now after more than a decade of research is a very large, very comprehensive and importantly, really, really consistent evidence base that the quality of people's diets is linked to their risk of common mental disorders. So this is particularly depression, but also anxiety. These are prospective associations independent of socioeconomic status, income, education, etc. And we see that people who have, I guess, more traditional type of diets, whether they're Japanese, Norwegian, Chinese, Brazilian, etc., diets that are higher in whole foods, more plant foods, they have, in general, a 30 to 35% reduced risk of developing common mental disorder over the lifespan. And we also have a very comprehensive now body of research from intervention studies showing that for people living with depression, dietary intervention to improve diet quality has a profound impact on depressive symptoms and anxiety symptoms as well. Now, critically, this association is seen right across the life course. So from the start of life right through to the end of life, and as we age and our brain ages, we see these links between nutrition and mental and brain health. In adolescence, we know that mental disorders, of course, are a major cause of disease burden, and we see that in this particular cohort, this is increasing around the world. And of course, there's many contributors to that. But one of the things we think is really important is the food that young people are eating. We see very clear, consistent dose-response relationships between the quality of young people's diets and their risk for common mental disorder, independent of family background, socioeconomic status, other health behaviours, etc. These relationships are not driven by body weight. In fact, we see these associations at every level of body weight. So this is not a matter of obesity per se. This is completely independent of body weight. I think that's a really important point. But going back to right at the start of life, there's a large body of evidence now too that the quality of diets during pregnancy is linked to children's mental health, but also neurodevelopmental disorders. So changing these. Next slides. Do I need to let them know if we need to progress?
Yeah,
need to have,
just
and the next one as well. Next couple of slides, actually. So the data that we're seeing and that we're generating, that our colleagues are generating, is seeing this very clear link, not just between mothers' diets during pregnancy, but also children's diets in the first through a few years, linked to mental and brain health, linked to ADHD, linked to autism spectrum disorders. And it seems that mothers' diets are playing an important part in this, but it's the mother's microbiome that is a function of their diet, and the microbiome of the infants, which we now know is critical, not just in training the immune system, but also in brain development. Next 2 slides, thanks. We're a bit delayed. So this is for adolescents. This is for infants and maternal diet. Next slide, thanks. This next one is looking at ADHD symptoms and diagnoses from these very, very large Norwegian cohorts. And as I said, many studies pointing to early life nutrition being critical to brain development in the start of life, but with the microbiome, the gut microbiome, as being an essential mediating factor. But of course, young people, like everyone in the Western world in particular, but increasingly in the global south, are eating very, very badly. So in Australia, less than 1% of toddlers are eating the recommended intake of vegetables, less than 4% of adolescents, less than 5% of adults. Australian teenagers eat on average 7 serves of junk food a day. Now, this is very much a function of our industrialised food environment. These foods that are very ultra-processed, they're ubiquitous, they're heavily marketed, they're very cheap, they're very socially normalised now. You can give all the individual lifestyle advice in the world, but with the obesogenic environment in which we live, food and what people are eating is extremely poor. And the focus has been very much on calories and profits rather than on health. So if we have next slide, thanks. Yes, so we know from the UN Food Summit report from 2021, and this I would describe maybe as a bit of a back of the envelope estimation, because there's so many data that we don't have and so much knowledge we don't have. But the costs of their industrialised food system globally, roughly $20 trillion a year. More than half of that is the cost to human health, but the largest chunk of the rest is the cost to the environment, because our industrialised food system is the leading cause of biodiversity loss. And it's not just tree clearing, it's not just animals that are lost through industrialised farming, etc. But really critically, it's the biodiversity in the soil, the microbiome of the soil, which then influences the microbiome of the air, the microbiome in plant foods, the nutrition density of plant foods, the maybe as many as 150,000 different types of phytochemicals that are in plants. And the microbial activity of the soil is the critical factor in the nutrient density of the food that in this case we're simply not eating. So can I have the next slide, thanks? So ultra-processed foods in particular are a major problem for the microbiome of humans. And this is the key point, is that the microbiome of the environment and the microbiome of humans is intrinsically linked. So ultra-processed foods, they make up about 70% of the food supply in the US, about 60% of energy intake across the US, the UK, slightly less in Australia. But these foods not only have no nutritional value, and in many cases they have excess sugar, salt, fat, etc., but their components such as artificial sugars and emulsifiers, colours, etc., seem to have a really noxious impact on the gut. The gut microbiome is the driver of immune function. It is the driver of everything from metabolic health, gene expression, mitochondrial function, etc. What it needs to function is fibre from plant foods and things such as polyphenols, and we're simply not consuming them. And so we're seeing this massive increase in chronic disease that is linked to immune function. So whether it's allergic diseases such as asthma and eczema, or it's cancer, we've seen an 80% increase in cancer in young people over the last 40 years, whether it's autoimmune conditions, multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, celiac disease, these are all increasing. Can I have the next slide, please? And we see that increased intake of ultra-processed foods is linked to early death, cardiometabolic diseases, common mental disorders. So this is our other review that was published in the BMJ last year, data from more than 10 million people. It was tabled in the UK House of Lords. It was influential in discussions in the US Senate, and tabled for more research into ultra-processed foods, because our research is showing that these ultra-processed foods, even when they're nutritionally balanced, they still have a noxious impact on the gut. And the gut, as the main driver of immune function and so many other aspects of our physiology, this is really problematic. Can I have the next slide, please? So when we think about all of these factors that are influenced by our diets and that are in turn linked to mental disorders, so our immune function, very important, gene expression, our neurotransmitter systems, our stress response system, mitochondrial function, brain plasticity, all of these are influenced by the microbiome in the gut. And through every aspect of our food system, whether it's the lack of polyphenols and fibre, whether it's the additives, whether it's the antibiotics in the food system, a major problem. We're losing the diversity of our microbes in the gut alongside the diversity of the microbes in the soil and the air and our plant foods. Next slide, thanks. This diversity, this loss of diversity, is linked to cancer, to frailty and dementia in older age, metabolic diseases, type 2 diabetes, Crohn's disease, and so many of those autoimmune and allergic conditions that I mentioned before. Next slide, please. And we can see that as our food system has become less and less and less diverse and more industrialised, we've had this loss of diversity in our food intake, loss of diversity in the microbes that we're consuming and in the air and the water and the soil. And again, this corresponding massive increase in allergic diseases and immune-related diseases. Next slide, thanks. As people move from traditional societies to the West and undertake, start to increase their intake of these ultra-processed foods, you see a loss of bacterial enzymes associated with plant degradation, loss of microbiome diversity. And this seems to increase with obesity and is compounded across generations. Next slide, thanks. So what we eat is absolutely critical to our health because it's critical to our microbiome. But what your food eats is the really critical factor. So the soil, the way we look after our soil, the way we farm is absolutely essential to every aspect of human health as well as planetary health. Next slide, please. We're starting to see these new data that in this case, there's 2 studies from this group in Finland where they took microbially active soil versus just dirt with no microbial activity, added it to the sand pit, the play box in childcare centres. The children who had exposure to the microbial active soil after 2 weeks, they had increased microbial diversity on their skin that correlated very directly to changes in their immune function and improvements in immune markers. We're seeing other data where microbially diverse soil seems to reduce anxiety-like behaviours as well as increasing microbial diversity in rodents. Next slide, thanks. And the next one. Thank you. And we've just finished a pilot study with a regenerative farm that is based on a school at a high school in Victoria, Australia, where young people, teenagers from the school that has the regenerative farm, compared to teenagers at an equivalent school close by that doesn't have a regenerative farm, had a far healthier microbiome profile in their gut. So we think that school lunch programs where the food is coming actually from regeneratively farmed produce can help to really address poor diet in young people, which of course influences the health of the next generation because we're seeing this intergenerational transmission of disease due to really poor nutrition. It addresses food security, and I think it can really play an important role in re-establishing biodiversity of humans and human health, as well as re-establishing this understanding of food and real food and addressing the issue of industrialised food. So there's many more things I could say, many more data, but I'll leave it just there and we can have a discussion later.